Ki Tavo. So one thing in this week's parsha, or the past week's parsha, which was recited at Shachrit today, is the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKan, which is chasing away the mother bird. And if somebody wants the chicks or the eggs, you can take them, but you have to chase away the mother bird, because it shows cruelty if someone goes and chaps the eggs in front of the mother or the chicks. You have to chase away the mother bird. And what it also, I also heard, what is if one wants to slaughter or eat the chicks and the mother bird, you can't do it on the same day. This rule was put in place because people may not have been so sensitive and would have done it one after the other, and causing anguish to the mother bird and or to the chicks. So it all goes back, as mentioned on numerous occasions, having sensitivity to others. And if one shows sensitivity to animals like that, even more so it should be to our fellow human beings.
I'm coming to get you. What?
Okay,
good.
So I was laughing at Arthur, not at what I just said, Damon.
Good, no problem. Good. I'm going to share the Mishnah. Arthur, are you present? I know your wife's calling you.
I'm there, Mark. Call me for a second. Yeah, well, still married life.
I get it. Arthur, do you want to read the Mishnah? Because last time...
I'll try about my glasses. I don't have glasses, but I'll give it a shot.
All right. You got your glasses off. That's how we know we're getting older. You've got to get your reading glasses. All right.
Yeah, I don't know where they are. I'll try you without them.
All right.
I'll go zoom in a bit here. Okay. Mark, why not zoom in? Give me a second. I've got zooming in properly. Okay, there we go. The previous chapter defined the circumstances of which the robber acquired the object he stole and need only pay monetary compensation for it. The following chapter discusses this concept in reference to a third party who received the stolen property from the robber. If one robs something and feeds it to his children, or if he left it before them intact as inheritance, they are not liable to pay the owner for it. Okay, but if it was real property, they are liable to pay.
Excellent. Okay, well read. Okay, you want to explain it in your own words and simple language?
Who are you speaking to?
You.
There's
No.
a question
not
there. What is
Kevin?
Okay.
Answer, please. Sorry,
I want to ask a question first. What is real property?
So I'm not feeling great.
Okay, excellent.
What does that mean?
Excellent. So Kevin has got the ball rolling on the 10th chapter with strength. Large Lochabot. That's brilliant. Okay.
Well done. I'm trying to survive the lecture. I'm sorry, guys. I'm not in a good state.
Okay.
Thanks.
So what this term is, real property, it's known as, in the Gemara, as a thing that is responsibility. And what does that mean is if you look at land or houses, when one incurs a monetary obligation, like, for example, damages, what we learned before is that you borrow money, you haven't paid the money back, and you sold a property to a buyer. Then there's a lien on that property with creditors and debtors. It's the same as robbery in a certain sense, in that once the lien is imposed on any real property, because it's either land on its own or houses on that land, it's fixed. And on that particular case, what it means is that, according to some of the opinions, it only takes effect if the court orders the debtor to pay or the robber to pay, And in other cases, they say it takes effect automatically. But as Kevin said quite rightly, what's this real property? It means there's a lien on a property because, unlike movable property, the claimant can rely on it for surety. It ain't going anywhere, guys. You can seize it, you can move it, but it's still, you can't physically move property that is land. There's absolutely no way you can do so. So, Kevin, that's a very, very good point. So, just prior to that, this general concept that we're dealing with in the Mishnah is it teaches that if the robber's children ate the stolen property, they don't have to compensate the owner. And by the way, guys, this law doesn't only apply to his children, but to any third party who ate or otherwise destroyed the property after it was stolen, because Nazikin is dealing with damages. So whether it's destroyed or eaten or consumed, there's nothing there to give back. And we're talking about a third party here. So we're going to see certain cases where third parties are liable and where they're not. Okay. So the Gemara derives that exemption from the Torah, but the Amoraim, just as you're going to see, are going to disagree when the circumstances occur. Look, the point of it is the robber himself must certainly make a restitution. But if he doesn't, in this particular case of our Mishnah, it doesn't seem that he has the ability to collect from the children if they've consumed the product. However, this is getting to Kevin's point. If the father died and the children inherited the article intact, and it was still intact when the owner claimed it from them, they need not return it according to many opinions, but according to certain opinions where fixed property is an asset that cannot be consumed, there is collection there. So we're going to visit the various opinions. All right. So, Kevin, well done. You're on the ball. First one out of the starting gate on chapter 10. That's pretty impressive, mate. Very impressive.
Yeah,
all right.
God, that was very good.
So the Gemara cites an Amorite ruling. Rav Chisda said, if one robbed something and the owner did not despair of recovering it, and another person came and take it, and he ate it when it was in the domain of the robber, the victim of theft has a choice. If he wants, he can collect payment from the robber, or if he wants, he can collect payment from the one who ate the item. What's the reason? We're talking about an example here where the robber steals food, and either his children or another third party ate it. So, why should the one who ate the item be liable? The reason is that as long as the owner did not despair of recovering his property, it stands in the possession of the owner. So when the person ate the stolen object, he took it directly from the owner's possession as if he was the robber himself. He must therefore pay for the item as though he stole it from the owner. Okay? So if you look at what was stated earlier, one who consumes property that was stolen by another is not obligated to pay the owner for it. Now, this is in direct contradiction to Rav Chisda, because he limits the ruling to when the third party consumed the item after the owner reached the stage of Ye'ush. What is Ye'ush? He abandoned hope of recovering a stolen property. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's Ye'ush literally means despair. But conceptually, it means he abandoned hope of recovering any stolen property. So although he's still legally the owner of the article, his ownership has been substantially weakened, since all you need then, once you have your ush, is a change of domain or a change of name. And that can now affect the acquisition of the article by another party. So consequently, if somebody other than the robber consumes the article after the owner's Ye'ush, despair, it's reasonable to apply the Torah's law, which exempts him from making restitution. But if this third party consumed it before the original owner despaired, he's viewed of having directly taken it from the owner, and he's subsequently liable to pay for it. obviously his liability doesn't detract from the robber's liability. And that's exactly why the owner of the stolen property may sue either one. Now, the preceding verse, guys, it only applies when the object has been consumed. If it's still intact, it must be returned to the owner even after Yu'ush, except in certain circumstances, which I'll discuss to you. Does that make sense? Any questions so far?
Is that Yahush? Is that abandonment, or what is, or is that despair?
Okay, Yu'ush is despair. Yu'ush is
okay.
despair. There's no abandonment. What you are confusing it with is a case of if somebody finds a lost item, which we did about 2 or 3 pashas ago, which Kevin reminded us, that if somebody finds a lost, I think it was even last week, if somebody finds a lost article, are they entitled to return it? And if there was despair of having retrieved it, the answer would be no. And I find it difficult to believe if the person's name and ID was in his wallet and his address. So I do find it difficult to understand, to be honest, in that case, if there's clearly a traceability. And firstly, how do you know the person despaired? So the reality.
I was referring to despair when we spoke about it a lot. No, it was last year.
Yeah, so despair, this concept of Yu'ush basically means that you've lost some sort of power because although you're still the legal owner, Gavin, the ownership has been weakened because you've kind of resigned yourself to not getting it back. There's some emotional letting go that weakens your hold on the object. Now, one of my difficulties that I have with this concept of Yu'ush is firstly perception of how do we know people have given up. The other aspect is that I remember last week, Akiva Bibi's daughter, Akira, said to me that one of the definitions she learned of Yu'ush, this is the advantage of having your daughter do Daf Yomi, is that it's a concept where in general circumstances, most people would have given up recovering it. So one of the factors that I would think would take into account is the length of time at which it's disappeared. That would be one factor. Another factor would be the generic look of the item. In other words, no markings which would indicate it belonged to a particular person. That could also be it. That's why when you have a change of domain, your likelihood of giving it up, getting it back when you've already despaired, is reduced because of the traceability diminishes. The other aspect is that a change of name also has an effect. Difficult to know what the change of name means, but we use that in terms of certain sacrifices where it changes its name. So, all right, the principles here are liability for the third party. If Yu'ush has taken place, then it's the third party seems as though there's no liability. If Yu'ush has not taken place, it's as if the third party, just like the robber, took it from the original owner, and therefore he can sue either party, the robber or the third party that consumed it in the robber's abode. Now, the Gemara challenges that ruling from our Mishnah, because we learned in our Mishnah, if one robs something and feeds it to his children, or if he left it before them as an inheritance, they are not liable to pay the owner for it. And the Mishnah's first ruling, that if the robber's children ate the stolen property, they are not liable. Okay? Basically, we want to know, listen, is it a refutation of Rav Chisda? Because Rav Chisda is actually saying, well, there is liability, that if the third party ate it, you could sue either the robber or the third party. So we're saying, is our Mishnah a contradiction to Rav Chisda? And the Gemara deflects the challenge. It says, listen, Rav Chisda would say to you very clearly that when the ruling was taught, it refers to where the children ate the stolen item after the owner despaired of recovering it. Because Rav Chisda states explicitly that the third party is only liable if he consumed the article before the owner reached Yeush and despaired of having it returned to him. In that case, he relinquished ownership. So if he hadn't yet gotten to the stage of Yeush, the children of the robber or any third party is liable, even if it's consumed. So if he consumed it after Yeush, he's not liable, but before Yeush, he is liable. Okay, very, very straightforward. So the Gemara quotes from the Mishnah, if he left it before them intact, as an inheritance, they are not liable to pay. So guys, the first case is if they consumed it. This case is if there's a inheritance, they are not liable to pay. So Rami Bava Kamma said, this teaches that the domain of an heir is like the domain of a purchaser. Okay. What does that mean? I'm going to repeat it again. Rami Bava Kamma said, this teaches that the domain of an heir, which we mean, guys, as an inheritor, is like the domain of a purchaser. In other words, when you leave property to your heirs, it undergoes a change of domain, just as it would if you were to sell it to a purchaser. Changes domain. Parents often don't live with their children. They might be in another country. They're certainly in another house. So by dint of this change, the heirs of the robber acquire the property that he stole. Even if it's still in existence, they're not obligated to return it by dint of change of domain. So Rami Bava Kamma maintains that when a robber leaves stolen property to his heirs, it undergoes what you call a shinoi rishut. So shinoi, when you learned that term, I taught it once to Arthur, a shinoi is when you move an object that's muksa in a different way to the way you usually handle it. Like if you're right-handed, you move it with your left hand, etc. And that shinoi, that change, shows that you're cognizant of the fact that you can't really use it. You shouldn't really move muksa anyway, but in certain circumstances when you have to give it out of the way, do things with change. And reshut is a domain. So a change of domain is the same as if you had to sell it to a purchaser. So if the owner despaired of recovering it, the robbed article, at that point, Yeush is not enough, according to some of the opinion. It has to be coupled with either change of residency or alternatively a change of name. In this case, Yeush had to have taken place and the children had to have inherited it and it gone to a different property. Now, not everybody agrees with Rami Bava Kamma because there's an opposing view by Rava, and Rava said the domain of an heir is not like that of a purchaser. In other words, in Rava's view, inherited property doesn't undergo a shino reush, so a shino reshut, meaning a change of domain. Why? Because he considers the heir's domain as an extension of the domain of the deceased robber. So in our case, although the robber's children inherited the stolen property after the owner's yush, they didn't inquire it. Why? Well, according to Rava, let's put it like this. Say Kevin's living in Israel and his parents are living in South Africa. Okay, they have a change of domain and Kevin leaves something behind. But according to Rava, it's his parents. So if Kevin left it behind, they're not going to take ownership. When Kevin comes back to South Africa or somebody's going to Ramat Gan, maybe his dad will organize that they deliver it to Kevin. Because there's a relationship, it's not considered as if it's a purchaser at which the change of domain has meant a change of ownership. Generally, families are close enough to know that it's considered almost an extension of the deceased robber. That's according to Rava. Okay. According to Rami Bava Kamma, Yeush coupled with a change of domain, even if it's children, suffices to ensure that the heirs do not have to give back that which was stolen, even if it's still in existence. Okay. So, according to Rava, the robber's heirs do not acquire the stolen property and they would have to return it as long as it's still in existence, extant. But it's weird because our Mishnah says we're dealing with a different case here. Why the heir is not liable to return it? So the very simple answer is it deals with the case where the heirs consumed it after they inherited it. Meaning, since a stolen article is no longer in existence, especially if it's food, the heirs cannot return it, nor can the owner claim monetary compensation from them because they were not the ones that stole it from him. So let me give you a summary of where we are up until now, because it's going to make sense. Guys, if you haven't listened to the show now, in a few lines, I'll give you a summary. So, before Yush despair, if the article still exists, it must be returned to the owner. If the third party consumes it, Rav Chisda obligates him to make restitution, the third party, because he can be sued. After Yush, after despair, in this case too, if the object exists, it must be returned to the owner. But if the third party consumes the article at the time, is not liable to pay. Then the third opinion is after Yush and a change of domain, if the object still exists, the third party need not return it because he has acquired it. That's according to Bava Kamma. But Rava disagrees as to whether inheritance constitutes a change of domain because of the relationship within the family. Okay, easily explained, guys. Okay, so now we're getting to Kevin's point, and this case of where we stayed at the end of the Mishnah, where Kevin asked this question. If it was real property, they are liable to pay, which refers to extant property, which means the property still exists. So it follows that in the first part of the Mishnah as well, we are dealing with stolen property that is still in existence. So basically, the Gemara currently understands the Mishnah's final classing of it. It says if there was real property, etc. Guys, it's very clear that if there's real property, you've got something with which to claim, because real property ain't going anywhere. Land doesn't disappear, except in San Francisco in an earthquake. But other than that, you're good. But we are saying is, why is this analogy put in the Gemara? So, Kevin, there's another concept that resembles real property in as far as people could identify it at any time as belonging to the victim of the theft. So if there was a particular bloke that had a bomber jacket that said Chicago Bulls on, in that particular case, if the heirs keep the article of that nature, people will see it, will say, oh, that's the cloak that was robbed by their father, because there was a guy around town that always wore the same sort of bomber jacket or motorcycle jacket, and he'd been robbed by the late father. So to avoid any disparagement of their late father's honor, in that case, they are entitled to return the article. So the preceding reason is relevant only as long as the article exists. Obviously, it follows that the Mishnah speaks of property that is still in existence. But nevertheless, the previous part of the Mishnah teaches that where the father's honor is not a consideration. In other words, the stolen article isn't one that's identifiable as belonging to the victim. So you can't say, oh, that was a victim and the father was their father. Then the heirs need not return it. So that seems to contradict Rava's opinion that heirs do not acquire stolen property and must return it as long as it's still in existence. You get why it contradicts Rava's thing, because Rava says that heirs are not, in other words, Bava Kamma turns around and says heirs are like purchasers of the property. It's going through a different domain. There's no return. And Rava turns around and says, well, there's family relationships. It doesn't matter if it's a different address. Family would return it to other members of the family. Therefore, you can't consider it like a normal purchaser, which is a third party. So this opinion seems to contradict Rava to say you don't have to return the stolen bomber jacket as long as it's not identifiable to a specific victim and the urban legend about their father that stole it from him. You get what I'm saying? So what would Rava reply? This is what the Mishnah is saying. If their father left them real property in his estate, when we say real property, guys, let's use the word fixed property as opposed to movable property. I prefer that word. It's real because you can claim against it. That's what it means. It has responsibility, is it? So, if their father left them fixed property in his estate, like a farm, they are liable to pay from the stolen article, even from that real property. Okay? So, Rava understands the Mishnah's last clause in a different way. He's not talking about movable property that's identifiable in the honor of the father. He doesn't see it like that at all. He's saying, look, if there is other property that the robber left to his heirs as an inheritance, then that becomes mortgaged in the father's lifetime to pay the victim of the theft. Therefore, if the heirs had consumed the stolen item, like it was, say they inherited food and they consumed that food, then Rava asserts that although they wouldn't be personally liable to pay the victim out of their own pockets because that food that was consumed is no longer in existence, the victim technically could seize the mortgage property as payment for their father's obligation, because that kicked in while the father was alive. So let's summarize what we're saying here. There are two recorded explanations of the Mishnah. You've got Bava Kamma, who says if the robber left the stolen article before them, as an inheritance, they are not liable to return it to the owner because they acquired it through, number one, Yeush, with the change of domain. So Yeush is obviously despair, with the change of domain because it went from the robber's home to an inheritance of the son's address. But if it was something similar to real property, insofar as people could identify it as belonging to the victim of the theft, they are liable to return it for the honor and sake of their father. That's the first opinion. Okay. Now, this is Bava Kamma. Now, as far as Rava is concerned, if he left the stolen article before them as an inheritance and they consumed it, they are not liable to pay the owner for it. However, if the article was still in existence, they would have to return it because according to Rava, inheritance, it's not as if the robber in his lifetime sold it to a purchaser and got paid for it, which would mean there was Yeush and a change of domain. Because he sees inheritance doesn't constitute a change of domain. For the case that I said, if Kevin left something in his father's place in South Africa, went back to Israel, his father would send it to him. Families have got a different sort of relationship. So inheritance is not the same as a purchase, according to Rava. But if there was real property in the father's estate, like a farm, they are liable to pay the victim from the real property since it was mortgaged for that purpose, irrespective of whether they consumed the food that was stolen or not. Either way, that's certainly obligated. Okay. Let's just see how much time we've got, guys. We've got 8 minutes. Okay. So the Gemara challenges Rava's answer, and Rebbe taught Rav Shimon, his son, the Mishnah doesn't literally mean fixed property or real property, Kevin. According to Rebbe, it means that even if the stolen article was like a cow, which was used for farming or milking the cow, or a donkey that was used as a burden to carry things, the robber's heirs are liable to return it to the victim because of their father's honor. So in other words, an heir of a robber would use the animals for those purposes. But the problem is, why would he have to return it? Because people knows Bessie the cow as belonging to the father, and therefore when the robber's children had Bessie the cow, they knew the original owner, and it's an embarrassment because apparently certain animals you can distinguish like clothing as belonging to the original victim. And again, it affects the honor. So they can't use the animal nor keep it. So even here, evidently the Mishnah is going to refer to stolen property that is still in existence. And the only reason they have to return it in this particular case, according to Rebbe, is it involves their father's honor. Well, that's what's proposed. So even Rava concedes that Rebbe interpreted the Mishnah differently. So in other words, Rava's interpreting it as actual property that can be attached because there's a lien on the property if the article is consumed. And Rebbe is interpreting it as if it's real property and that it's identifiable, and therefore it's a dishonor to the robber if the people know it's the victim's property, and the sons shouldn't have it around in order to dishonor their late father. So Rava concedes that Rebbe interpreted the Mishnah differently. Rava cites a brisa which supports his interpretation, because without, it seems as though Rava couldn't argue with Rebbe unless he had quoted somebody of a similar stature to Rebbe. So Rava said, when I die, Rav Oshia will come out to greet me because I interpreted our Mishnah in accordance with him. In other words, with the brisa that he taught. For Rav Oshia taught the following brisa: if one robs something and feeds it to his children, they are not liable to pay the owner for it. If he left it before them as an inheritance, as long as the stolen property is still in existence, they are liable to return it to the owner. But once the stolen property is no longer in existence, like it's food and it's been consumed, they are not liable to pay him compensation. If, however, their father left them real property, like fixed property, like farmland in his estate, they are liable to pay for the stolen article from that real property, because once the father stole, those proceeds of those properties, there's a lien on them, and they mortgage to pay for his obligation of either to creditors, for his theft, etc., to the victim. So should the heirs inherit such property, they've got to allow the victim to collect it from them if the stolen article no longer exists. So that's how Rav explains the Mishnah. Rebbe and Bava Kamma, by contrast, guys, understand the Mishnah is referring to a case where the stolen property is in existence and that the heirs need not return it unless people would identify it as belonging to the victim. So we're saying, since Rava has the support of Rav Oshia's brisa, he's actually at liberty to interpret our Mishnah in accordance with it, regardless of Rebbe's dissenting interpretation. Why? Because Rav Oshia is on a similar level to Rebbe, and therefore, if there's a Tana that makes a statement, and a Moira can't contradict it unless he brings another Tana, for example. I would say, let's just see, we've got a few minutes. Okay, guys, I need a few minutes. So as stated earlier, Rav Chisda ruled that if a third party ate the stolen article before the owner despaired of recovering it, the victim has the choice of suing either the robber or the third party. And the Gemara challenges this brisa from Oshia's ruling. The master said in our brisa, the master is Rav Oshia, but once the stolen article is no longer in existence, they are not liable to compensate the owner. Let us say that this is a refutation of Rav Chisda, and the Gemara says it's quite simple. Rav Chisda would say to you that the ruling is taught by Rav Oshia when the children ate the stolen item after the owner despaired of having recovered it. But if he hadn't despaired, there's a liability. So the master said in a brisa, as long as the robbed article is still in existence, they're liable to return it. And let us say maybe this is a refutation of Bava Kamma, who maintains that inherited property undergoes a change of domain, and therefore the children of the robber can keep it. So according to Bava Kamma, since the stolen property underwent a change of domain and the owner despaired of recovering it, both Yerush and then the change of domain, the robber's heir should acquire the article. Why does the Brisa obligate them to return it according to Rav Oshia? Because Rami Bava Kamma would say to you, when their ruling was taught in the Brisa, it refers to a situation before the owner despaired of recovering the stolen object. So in other words, there has to be Yush before a change of domain, even according to Rami Bava Kamma. All right, guys, we've got 1 minute 45 left. I'm done. Any questions? Are we good? We good? Okay. Guys,
You
lovely.
say change of domain, Damon. So
Yeah.
there's a change of domain. Domain is does that mean new change of ownership? Is that what domain?
So, interesting question. So Yeush on its own of just despairing of ever retrieving the article that was stolen from you, etc., is not sufficient. It has to change location in addition to it. Because why? That would solidify the despair. If it's in your home, you might despair, or if it's in a traceable home, you could despair. But at the point where the robber sells it to a purchaser, it's like there's so many chains down the line, the likelihood of getting it back is slim, unless it's real property that you can attach. But movables, you can kiss goodbye.
Yeah.
So, Kev, sorry, I know you need to see your mate. I was
No,
ready
no, it's
to
fine. We've got
do- I
1
just
minute.
had to
It's
do
fine. We've
outdoor,
done the full share.
23 minutes after 7, but at 7:45 I was ready for committee. I wish you all a blessed
If I would have
week.
phoned you at 25 past 7, you would have been available.
No. I'll take a few
28
minutes.
past 7. Okay.
All right, guys.
Gavin, sorry, you look like sorry.